On a hot, humid afternoon in Witu area of Tana River County, Lamek, Kibet and other members of Back to Eden Biodiversity Conservation Group are working in their tree seedling nursery garden.
Tulikaa chini tukaangalia tukaona hii msitu ni kama unaisha. Na sisi tukiendelea kumaliza na wale wengine watakao toka nyuma yetu pia watakuta nini? Tukakaa chini tukasema lazima tuhakikishe tumerudi pale tulipokuwa, pale mahali ilikuwa mwanzo.
Having lived his entire life here, Kibet knows the destruction that has taken place in the Delta and the impact of that to residents like him. Today he leads one of the community conservation groups that are focused on restoring degraded indigenous trees, which they say are of many benefits to the community and some are on the verge of extinction.
Tunalenga miti ambayo zimekona matunda sana sana, tena siwe za kiasili.
Hii miti ambayo kwamba ni ya kiasili na mababu zetu walikuwa kitumia kama dawa na chakula inapotea. Kwa hivyo tukaona ni muhimu kama jamii tuweze kushikana ili kwamba tuweze kuihifadhi hii miti na kuiregesha hii miti.
Covering over 130,000 hectares of land spanning across Tana River and Lamu counties along the Kenyan coastal region, the Delta acts as a sponge in absorbing and restoring flood water. Despite its status as a Ramsar site, meaning it's a wetland of international importance, the Delta still has no conservation status in Kenya. Human activities and natural impacts have therefore been taking a toll on one of East Africa's largest and most significant coastal delta and its ecosystems.
The delta is under siege, basically. Human activities are actually stretching us beyond the limit that the delta can contain.
This is Mililo, the heart of the delta. The once lush green vegetation has now been replaced by tiny patches of dying grass and carcasses, the vivid sign of the destruction.
Within the land use plan, or the Tana Delta land use plan, this was an area that was envisaged to be a conservation area. So this was supposed to be a dry season grazing area. It was also supposed to be helping the issues around wildlife conservation and things like that. But as you can see, because of the failures of farming within other areas, a farmer has actually come in the core delta and established a farm about 2 meters from the river. And so what you're seeing, and you're seeing all livestock around here, this is a potential conflict zone.
If a small piece of land is producing very little production, what are you going to do as a farmer? You have to increase your land. So people are cutting down trees, forests, to ensure that they expand their agricultural land so that they can increase their production.
Human degradation over the years, coupled with prolonged drought, has destabilized the ecosystems here, resulting in devastating consequences, some previously unimaginable.
Hii inaitwa Lake Shakababo na ilikuwa ni ziwa kubwa sana, na hizi ile unaona kama kuna polythene ambazo ziko juu kuonyesha kwamba maji yalikuwa yamefurika kabisa hiyo sehemu. So hii sehemu mnaiona kwamba imekuwa dry, ni maji yamekimbia umbali karibu kilomita 4 ama 5. So sasa imekuwa ni sehemu tu ambapo kwamba watu wanalima.
At a time when climate change threatens our world, the need to conserve the planet's biodiversity has never been more urgent. Community members are taking steps to restore indigenous forests and stabilize the ecosystem in the delta.
Baada ya kuleta mbegu, kuna zile za kuweka direct kwa mifuko, kuna zingine ambazo ni ndogo mpaka siweka kwa nursery mahali sikue kidogo, sikikua ndio siwe zimefika size ya kufanya nini, ya kuweza kupanda. Like the biblical Eden, Back to Eden is a story of restoring harmony in the ecosystem, where humans get value from the environment
without destabilizing it. And for this group, the journey back to Eden begins here by planting back indigenous trees in the forest, one seedling at a time.
Sisi huwa tunaangalia msimu. Kama mara hii msimu ni wa Abyssinia marine ambao sisi tunaita mchu. Tutaenda kule, tunajua Abyssinia iko upande huu, ndo tutakuwa tunaenda hapa, ndo tutachukua mbegu. Tunachukua mbegu na zile mbegu bado tunaangalia ile area jangwa ambayo ilikuwa ni Abyssinia. Tunapanda zile sehemu ambazo zia huo Abyssinia. Kufikia sasa tumepanda miche 575,000 kufikia sasa. Na bado tunaendelea.
The communities have been mobilized into groups and environment-centered associations.
Every village has a village natural resource and land use committee. This is a small committee that spur restoration in that village. They are the committees that ensure the resources that are around their village are sustainably used.
Sahi miti haikatwi, ndio kaona hizi mangrove sahi zimekaa vizuri. Hata ule msitu wetu wa P3 kidogo una afadhali kufikia sahi.
Najua ikirudishwa hiyo hali yake ya zamani, nakwambia hata wavuvi hatakosa samaki, wakulima hawatakosa chakula, ndege hawatakosa mahali pa kukaa na chakula yao.
Traditional practices that have for so long supported lives and livelihood in the Delta are no longer sustainable. Having realized their contribution to the degradation that has taken place, communities here are taking steps to rewrite the wrongs by restoring degraded indigenous forests back to their natural state and make peace with nature. Reporting from the Tana Delta, I am Juma Majanga.
Hello from the United Nations Environment Programme. Generation restoration is the hashtag used by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which runs from this year until 2030. The goal of this UN Decade is to reset our relationship with nature, to make peace with nature and heal the damage that we've done on this planet. If we do this, it will improve livelihoods, it will help to stop climate change, it will halt biodiversity loss. So generation restoration is the rallying call from the United Nations to you, everyone, everywhere alive today is generation restoration, to become active, restore ecosystems, be conscious of the things we eat, how we farm, be politically active, remind your politicians and decision makers everywhere that we all depend on nature and we must prevent, halt and reverse the degradation of ecosystems worldwide.
Hello and welcome to the interview segment of Climate Focus, the show that's the call to action. Today, we are discussing about the restoration initiative in the Tana Delta, and I am joined by Program Manager at the United Nations Environment Programme for the Restoration Program. Victoria Luke, karibu sana.
Asante sana, Juma. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Pleasure. Now, Victoria, let's talk about what UNEP is doing to address the land degradation in the continent of Africa.
65% of productive land in Africa is degraded. We know that 3 million hectares of forests are being lost in Africa every year, and that really represents almost 3% loss of GDP per year because of linked to soil and nutrient depletion. We provide the scientific foundation, policy expertise, and innovation to restore degraded land. And most of that work is done behind the scenes because an important part of our work is in support of the UN conventions. So to implement the actions that the conventions have set themselves to address, the Global Environment Facility was created to provide funding towards those goals. And UNEP is one of the founding agencies of the GEF. And that provides us with innovative and scalable projects that can be implemented to address, through sustainable land management, which is, the main approach that we use to address land degradation.
You've mentioned about restoration. So what does ecosystem restoration entail?
Ecosystem restoration is very much a global undertaking. at a massive scale. So we are repairing billions of hectares of land to provide access to food, to water, to jobs, and also bringing animals and plant species that were at the brink of extinction back. And it can involve, very obvious stuff, such as planting trees using native species in forests that have been cut down. But it also entails definitely some very important work working with governments, because we need to change the legislation, we need to change policy, and also work with private sector to see how the natural resource management is being approached and shifting into more sustainable practices, and similarly with local communities to make sure that the land management is also shifting towards sustainable practices.
Now, let's talk about the restoration initiative by UNEP and other partners. How does this help address the complex issue of restoration?
The Restoration Initiative addresses this complexity of the restoration agenda by looking at best practice, and we have different components. One of them is focusing on policy, not only from the national level, but also acting at the local level. And then we are providing technical tools and approaches to do that planning that relates to the policy work in terms of applying innovative methods, such as the Restoration Opportunities Assessment methodology that has been spearheaded by IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and the World Resources Institute. We need to make sure that there's finance also available and investments for restoration. And right here in Kenya, 6,000 hectares of agricultural, pastoral land that are put under restoration. 50,000 hectares of forest is now under improved management. And there's also 120,000 hectares of indigenous community conservation areas, land that is being put under sustainable land management practices. And this is all benefiting more than 25,000 individuals in the Tana Delta.
Now, how best can countries in Africa, like Kenya, integrate ecosystem restoration in their post-COVID-19 recovery plans?
I think what is important to note, and we're starting to see, is the need for a triple investment or tripling the investments in nature-based solutions by 2030 to support health, to increase the quality of life in the continent, and to create jobs, create green jobs in particular. So we need to shift those harming subsidies that we're seeing in agriculture, in energy, in different sectors, and shift them to nature-smart policies that target also a considerable reduction in the natural land conversion that is happening in Africa very rapidly.
Maybe from your experience, what are some of the gaps that you may have identified in terms of policy that will help in promoting large-scale ecosystem restoration in Africa?
We are seeing a lack of policy coherence. We are all used to being separated in silos and work in our own silos. And environment, climate change, all these issues are cross-cutting. They affect every sector of the economy. It's very difficult to make progress without that happening. So policy coherence is a major gap. Another issue that is critical is having the right monitoring systems. We need to understand what's happening, what shifts are being generated by what type of action, and monitor and report on that to understand the scale of the problem and also the scale of the solutions.
Maybe just your final thoughts on the larger issue of restoration.
We need to help nature rest, and we need to help nature recover so that it can deal with all these threats and challenges that we keep throwing at it.
And that's where we come to the end of the show today. Join me again next week for another episode of Climate Focus. I've been your host, Juma Majanga.